What a great pleasure to be with you all. As you've heard, I am a conductor, and I want to talk to you principally today about trust, that most fundamental gel in all human relationships, and the thing upon which my job absolutely depends. There has to be an unshakable bond of trust between me and an orchestra, through which and within which we can spin a musical narrative that we all believe in. Now, it hasn't always been like this. Up to and around about the Second World War, conducting was less about trust and more about coercion. Conductors were tyrannical figures who would rehearse not just the orchestra as a whole, but each individual element within it, within an inch of their lives, where to breathe, how to colour a phrase, etc. Very little room for personal response and personal input. Largely, of course, the world has moved on from the dictator paradigm. Music's moved on with it, and the conductor-orchestra relationship now is much more about a two-way street, a shared vision. I, as the conductor, have to come to the rehearsal with a cast-iron sense of the outer architecture of a piece of music, within which then, in rehearsal, there is enormous personal freedom for each and every member of the ensemble to shine. It's a wonderful thing. And you know, when people say to me, what instrument do you play? I say, well, I play the orchestra. It is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Because this orchestra is a kind of intangible. It's not like I'm actually holding something. All I have is air. I move air around and I use my body. After all, at the point of sale, the gig, I can hardly shout out instructions. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the South Bank Sinfonia. Right, that's all well and good, isn't it? That trust bond between the conductor and the orchestra. But before any of that can work, I have first to trust myself. Now, if you think about it, when you don't trust yourself, what do? You overcompensate. You almost exaggerate the truth in order to get your point across. And in my game, that means you over-gesticulate. In the early years of my career, I spent a lot of time flailing around like a giant windmill in the hope that the orchestra might just get a teeny bit louder for me. Now, very quickly, there's no trust in the room in that situation. Rather, I have become a figure of fun. And I remember a joke which a particularly pernicious member of an orchestra in the early years of my career decided to share with me, and it goes as follows. He said, Charles, what do you think is the difference between a bull and an orchestra? I said, I don't know what is the difference between a bull and an orchestra. He said, well, with a bull, the horns are at the front and the arseholes at the back. You can imagine that joke turned my guts to water, and how futile seemed the words of advice I received around about that time from the great veteran British conductor Sir Colin Davis, who sadly recently died. He said, Charles, you've got to remember that conducting is a bit like holding a small bird in your hand. You hold it too tightly, you crush it. You hold it too loosely, and it flies away. Well, in those early days, I couldn't even really find the bird. Anyhow, time has moved on. I have found some position of self-trust, and therefore, of course, things flow much more naturally and easily and healthily between me and an orchestra. And the other thing, of course, that I've glimpsed so strongly is that music is a beautiful metaphor for life. It is, after all, the most universal language we have, way beyond any dialect or tongue. You can play a tune to a child in Beijing, and you can play the same tune to a child in Cape Town. Despite the enormous differences in experience and cultural background between those two children, they will draw some of the same truths from that melody. So music is this wonderful universal thing, and in the context of an orchestra or any other kind of healthy and well-oiled musical organism, there are two things at play, aren't there? There's the tremendous paramount importance of individual contribution, each and every one, but there is that amazing, thrilling pull of the collective. Now, I've learned a lot about that with a recent project of mine, which has been also about building trust where there is none. My youngest child was born just over 6 years ago with cerebral palsy. So what she's done, aside from just being a beautiful little human being, is she's introduced me to a whole community of people which I had not thought about before. In other words, the community of disabled people. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so I've been conducting orchestras around the world for over 20 years now. How many musicians with disability have I found in any of those groups in that 20-year period? And the answer is I can remember 3. Now, you can't tell me that there aren't millions of prodigiously gifted musicians who happen to be disabled. So where on earth are they? Where is their platform? Now, this was about 18 months ago, and of course, there was a big event coming to London, which was still fairly far in the future at that point, which was the London 2012 Paralympics. An amazing moment in time where this initiative, which I'm proud to say was a British one, was coming home to London. But let's not forget that it's taken over 50 years for the world to come into a position of trust with Paralympian sport, to actually believe that it's not about the therapeutic benefits of those taking part. No, it's about world-class sportsmanship. London 2012 was an amazing moment to celebrate that, and there can't any longer be an intelligent person anywhere on the planet who doesn't believe in the absolute value of Paralympian sport. So here I am, a musician. I'm thinking, yeah, sport is pretty universal. Music, more so. So why on earth are there not brilliantly gifted musicians with disability playing in all the leading orchestras around the world and every other equivalent ensemble? So I thought, with the Paralympics coming to London, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to try and make a difference, to shine a big, bright light on this issue. So I formed a group called the British Para Orchestra, which is, believe it or not, the world's first ever pan-disabled ensemble, which has 2 particular kind of objectives. Firstly, to create a platform for brilliantly gifted musicians who are disabled, but secondarily, and of equal importance, is to change the perspectives of the world around us. I just want to show you a little very brief film clip of this amazing moment when the Para Orchestra played at the closing ceremony of the London 2012 Paralympic Games.
Please give them a great big warm welcome, the British Para Orchestra.
Such fun being able to get back into music and be playing again.
When I'm making music, I feel like a pilot in the cockpit flying an aeroplane. I become alive.
Yeah, it's removed some of the paralysis.
Every single person on stage has had a primary hand in its creation.
There's so much more to a person than their disability.
Where then are the platforms for brilliant musicians who happen to be disabled, just as there are amazing sporting platforms?
I just want to hear you sing.
I hope that we're just going to grow and grow together. You know, we can grow into something very, very, very special, and I'm just hoping that the world will see how we're trying to change people's perceptions of things, and I hope they see.
You could watch and listen to them all day. The Paralympic Orchestra playing Hilda Lavalier.
So as I said to you, thank you. I said to you just now, this project was so much about building trust where there is none. I've never had to campaign so hard for a single thing in my entire life. I was barracking at number 10 Downing Street. I was barracking at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, the British Paralympic Association, the organising committees who were in charge of the ceremonies around the Games. And at the back of everyone's mind, there seemed to be the same fundamental thought, often not actually articulated because it's too embarrassing. That thought was, I don't trust you that it'll be any good. You know, sure, it might be therapeutic, it might be nice and warm and fluffy for the people taking part, but will the music be any good? Well, you can imagine how rabidly angry that made me. And after one heck of a lot of persistence, finally the walls started to come down. Now, this group has shown me again of the power of music as a way of enforcing, enhancing, and making healthy community. And being as this session is a lot about community, I thought I'd explore that just for a minute, a little bit further. There is something about singing which is so fundamentally important. You know, I've done a lot of work over the years in South Africa, the most dizzyingly musical country on the planet, where pretty much everyone sings about pretty much everything pretty much all the time. I mean, in the Xhosa culture, there are probably 300 songs for doing the washing up. Can you imagine how many there are for a circumcision ritual? I mean, literally thousands. And to give you an example of this, I set up an opera company out of the townships of South Africa about 12 years ago, and in the first week of the proper rehearsals, 2 of them died, completely without any prior warning. I don't think they knew that they were ill, and we didn't either. Of course, it was HIV, and we pulled the company together as a whole to tell them this news. There was an initial hysterical response, but very quickly someone began to sing. Someone else joined in, and someone else, and within 5 minutes, everyone in the room was singing. And that group of people sang fairly constantly for about 72 hours. And then they were over it. They were ready to move on. So it's not so facetious, is it, to claim that actually if the whole world sang just a little bit every day, we'd have so far fewer problems. I mean, the British Parliament, imagine if those MPs had to have a good old sing before they got debating. Things would move more easily, wouldn't they? Now, I think you can see where this is leading. I think we need to do a little singing, ladies and gentlemen. Those of you that are not from the UK have probably noticed there's a dominant hallmark to the British, which is that we are quietly melancholic as a race. You know, our weather's a bit rubbish. Our national cuisine is certainly not of the best. We're glumly accepting, right? We are glumly accepting, which is why we've never had a revolution here. You know, it's kind of all right. So, of course, we're enthralled to melancholic tunes, and I've got a lovely one that I want to share with you now. It goes like this. Have a listen. Rose, 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 when shall I see thee wed? I marry that thou wilt when I am dead. 2 people, right? One's singing to Rose, and he's singing, Rose, 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 Rose. When are you going to get married? When shall I see thee wed? Rose responds, I marry that thou wilt when I am dead. Clearly, Rose ain't never going to get married. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's give it a little try. I'm going to sing you a phrase, and I want you to put your backs into it and sing it back to me, okay? Shut off your left brain and engage your right brain, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. Rose, 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 rose. You go. Rose, 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 rose. When shall I see thee wed? I marry that thou wilt. I marry that thou wilt. When I am dead. All together now. Rose, 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 rose. When shall I see thee wed? I marry that thou wilt. When I am dead. Yeah, you see, music is all about narrative. It's all about storytelling, right? There's a perfect little kind of piece of narrative here in front of us. It sets out its stall. Rose, 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 rose. And there's a little bit of heating up. When shall I see thee wed? Climax, the hot point, the punchline of this narrative. I marry that thou wilt. And you hear that? Wilt. I call that the X Factor scoop. Guaranteed to make people feel sorry for you, to emote on your behalf. I marry that thou wilt. You need maximum traction on that line, ladies and gentlemen. And then a lovely little kind of droopy payoff. When I am dead. Okay, so with that in mind, let us sing again. Are we ready? And Rose. Come on. Yes. Okay, we're building. Yes. Climax. Very nice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, would you trust me if I said I could now get you singing that in 3-part harmony? Would you trust me? I think you should, ladies and gentlemen. I have, after all, got all evening. Okay, so we're going to set up that lovely piece of music with which the orchestra started this session, and then we are going to bed this over the top. We're going to say that you are group 1, and then after a phrase, you will come in, group 2, and then finally, group 3, no pressure, you will come in last. So, of course, that means you will finish our little ditty. Let's have a healthy sense of competition in the room. Let's make sure each group is better than the last. Okay, so here we are. 3, 4. Okay, find your oxygen. Here we go. Now, Rose, Rose, Rose. Group 2. Rose, Rose. Come on! And... and again. Should we call that the dress rehearsal? Yes, on your feet, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, get off your lazy butts and let's do this properly. Do you know what? There's a little lacking of cohesion with pulse, ladies and gentlemen. You need to feel that beat coursing through your veins, right? As I said, I've got all evening. Okay, once again, 3, 4. Don't disappoint me. 3, 4. Rose, Rose, Rose. Better that. Rose, Rose, Rose. And Rose, Rose. Come on. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The Church of Google. You saw it here, you saw it now. So, my parting shot comes courtesy of the great Joseph Haydn, one of the most extraordinary composers of the second half of the 18th century, and a composer that spent the bulk of his life as almost an indentured employee of a prince who had 2 palaces, one in Vienna and one right on the border of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a place called Esterházy. Now, it was this country palace where the prince liked to spend most of his time, and of course where he was, where there was all his retinue, and certainly Haydn and the orchestra. Now, one day in 1772, the prince decreed that he no longer wanted the orchestral musicians' families to live at the country palace. They were going to be sent back to Vienna, which is, of course, calamitous for Haydn and for the orchestra. And they were absolutely distraught, this fact they were going to be split up from their families. Haydn remonstrated with the prince, but to no avail. So, given that the prince loved his music, Haydn thought he'd write a symphony to make the point. A symphony which has the musicians peeling off, leaving in a kind of sullen revolt. And I'm happy to say that as a result of this symphony, the prince did a U-turn on his policy and all ended up being well. And I think this piece of music sums up what I've been trying to say quite well, that where there is trust, there is music, and by extension, life, vitality, hope. Where there is no trust, the music quite simply withers away.
you.